Welcome. My name is Stephanie Zarobin. I'm the Director of Research here at Internet Retailer, and I will be moderating today's webinar. Today we will be discussing omnichannel marketing and some strategies retailers can take to give customers personalized and consistent shopping experiences across all devices and locations. Anyone that listens to retailer earnings calls or reads news on our website will know that omnichannel is a hot topic and a real buzzword at the moment. A lot is changing in retail online and offline, and for many retailers quite a lot is at stake for them and their ability to deliver on the promise of an omni-channel shopping experience. Today we'll discuss some step-by-step strategies for doing just that, and we'll also get some real-life examples of omni-channel programs in action. Our two speakers today are intimately involved with using data and analytics to appeal to shoppers in a number of ways. Our first speaker is Corey Coburg. He's a founding partner of digital marketing analytics firm Cardinal, the sponsor of today's webinar. Corey is the author of a book called Google Analytics, Essential Training, and served as a technical editor of another book called Performance Marketing with Google Analytics. He has consulted for dozens of Fortune 500 companies such as Google, Chevron, NBC, and Papa John's. Unfortunately, our second speaker from Intel was called away today at the very last minute and is unable to make it. But we've got an interview with Chuck at Intel that the folks at Cardinal Path will be making available to everyone on the call in the coming days. In his place, we have with us John Hossack, the CEO and co-founder of Cardinal Path. So we're happy to have him join us today. On our webinar today, you can ask questions at any time, and we'll take them after both presenters speak. And in the next day or two, everyone on the call will get an email with instructions on how you can obtain the slides you'll see today, as well as a link to presentations that you can share with colleagues. Now I will turn the mic over to our first speaker, Corey Coburg. Corey?
Thank you. So as consumers, we've all experienced brands that do a very good job of interacting with you with a single channel. So for instance, they have in-store experts and they really understand how their products work. So you can think about your local butcher. They are a single channel operation. They don't do email, they don't advertise. Now, if you move over to this next kind of evolution, the multi-channel side, this is some brands, they can interact with consumer across these multiple channels, but they're managing each of those channels independently. Now, everyone's had that moment where you're in store with a coupon and you receive your email, and the sales associate really has no clue about the promotion that you're looking at, or worse, that item hasn't even arrived in the store yet. They don't offer to help you, they don't bring it in for an online order, they try and do anything to kind of save this disappointing interaction. And so we think about that from a multi-channel point of view. Now, brands that are able to execute from a cross-channel perspective, they're able to provide a consistent messaging and offers to customers, but they're typically only doing this at certain points in that customer journey. The focus here is often on orchestrating campaigns, and those campaigns will be coordinated. But really moving to omni-channel, that's really when we talk about understanding and optimizing for this entire customer journey across all channels at all points. Brands need to think about how they can begin to really orchestrate a consistent experience across all of their channels and then have that same offer, that same voice, regardless of the channel and the point. And this is really the vision of how Cardinal Path views true omni-channel marketing and what we hope to speak about today. So the reality is that customer expectations have changed. This isn't just something that marketers want to do to improve where we're coming from and further our own goals. This is something that customers are looking for as well. And in 2016, they're not defining a relationship with a brand by a channel. They expect brands to understand and react to their needs, and they will reward those that do. So when we think about enabling this, the key is to first understand as much as we can about who they are. Now, we have data about how they've interacted with our brand, their website, their social properties, email. You have all these different channels, and often folks will even volunteer their preferences, and other times, if they don't, we can collect data that infers what these preferences are likely to be based on some predictive elements. Now, relevancy here is critical, as is consistency of message across those channels. Customers will engage when the conversation is about what they are interested in, and the timing is critical here to seize that moment for when that topic is relevant to that person. So expectations here are growing. Customers are getting frustrated when brands don't take into account their past behaviors. Now, this includes research, shopping experience, post-purchase, all these steps of the journey. The examples of this. So mobile research and shopping is definitely something that's on the rapid increase. In-store shopping remains widely popular. Now, the question is, how can these digital channels enhance that in-store experience? Consumers expect that flexibility when they're interacting with their brands. So you've got research online, purchase in store. Purchase online, pick up in store. Purchase in store, maybe have the item shipped to you the same day at home. Crossing these different boundaries within a single visit, within a single transaction. And the thing is, once these consumers experience omnichannel done right, they come to expect that same level of service with every brand they interact with. So it's not just enough to look at what your direct competitors are doing. Customers are comparing you to all the brands they engage with. Now, one thing that's different here, bricks and mortar retailers can really differentiate around this consumer desire for flexibility and the fact that folks still like to go into stores.
Imagine the problem of not having enough space to exhibit your entire product range. Well, this is what was starting to happen for Adidas, and they came up with the idea of creating a virtual footwear wall. It appeared to be a natural extension for their physical product range, as it could showcase their entire product range virtually, allowing their customers to interact with the entire footwear line, not just what they could fit on the shelves. And even more interesting than just this virtual aspect, by being able to sense the gender of a customer, the virtual wall would make product recommendations based on this, putting the products that would be of most interest to the person right in front of them. Then the person could pick the product from the wall and purchase it from the store or have it shipped to them at home.
John, actually, that reminds me, I had a similar conversation with another client who was also in the footwear business, and he was lamenting that they had heard from an end user. This user had received an email from them that was exactly what they needed. I think the subject line was something like stylish brown leather shoes, and it was literally exactly what they were looking for. So he was excited. He opened up the email, quite dismayed to find that every single one of those in there was 100% women's shoes. And this customer was so frustrated, they actually replied with this disappointment. And so the marketer team got this and went over to the email team and said, why did you send this email? Their answer was, well, the women's products convert at a higher percentage. Okay, and he said, is that also true when the customer receiving this email full of women's shoes is male? And they simply said, well, we don't target that way. And so this really speaks to this problem. When you're not segmenting, you're not adjusting to your audience, then there's near a 0% conversion rate when you're putting the wrong content in front of the wrong audience at the wrong time. And in this case, they actually did actual damage to the brand. Again, folks come to expect better.
Yeah, Corey, it seems like that one's very much a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. In the Starbucks example here, and Starbucks is a brand that I'm a very loyal customer of. They know me by my cup, they know me by name, and by my drink. And how did they win me? It was really with a mobile-first experience. By evolving their interaction with the customer with their mobile experience, for someone like myself who travels a lot, visiting Starbucks, finding the nearest location, being able to cross the border between Canada and the U.S. and pay seamlessly, now with the new level of ordering in-app and picking up in-store, making my life even easier, this ability to work with me across borders, across stores, across beverages has really got me to be a very loyal customer. And they also deliver this cross-channel promotion, linking up both their email messages, which I'm getting, as well as the in-app promotions as well. So for me, it's just been a great customer experience, which has really endeared me to their brand.
And I think there's some key points on what's made this successful for them, right? So first is it's been iterative. They didn't start with in-app ordering. It was simply the payment side. And so they didn't let the fact that they didn't have every single thing on their wish list stop them from implementing this and improving it as it goes, as they've been able to upgrade and put in infrastructure to support more of the things they wanted to do. They've updated it and improved the experience. And so it can be something where it's about the journey and doesn't necessarily have to have Rome built in a day. They also took advantage of existing infrastructure that was there. So they had a loyalty program, they had a gift program, they had things that were already there, and simply linking these to an account for folks to use and take advantage of those took advantage of what they've got. And we always encourage clients to do that. If you've got infrastructure that exists that gives you a differentiator or a leg up, by all means take advantage of that. And then lastly, you really need to find creative ways to work around issues. So in this case, their point-of-sale systems didn't have that full final link, and so you had to actually provide a code to the cashier for some of the offers, and that's fine. It's still faster, it's still clear, you still have everything all lined up and queued and ready to go, and then you provide that final code for the point of sale system. So again, find ways to work around those. Don't let small problems derail your progress. So studies are showing that marketers are also want to get in the omni-channel business here, and more quickly than they've been doing before. So the first one here, while they see the visions, organizations are struggling to get there. They clearly see that consumers are expecting this seamless experience. So the survey by SAP here at 86% of marketers agree that omni-channel benefits outweigh the challenges. And there are certainly some challenges. We'll talk about those in a minute, but the important thing here being marketers have realized that despite those challenges, they need to get moving on this. And also, even though omnichannel is the goal, we've really only got 16% of businesses saying that they are meeting the needs for the consumer experience via multi-channel here. So it's one where they know they need to do it, they know there's some challenges, and we know that folks are struggling to keep up there. So if you out there are in that boat, you are in good company. Now, part of why this is so challenging is that customer activity is not linear. So we used to have these marketing funnels, and maybe they were never true, but certainly today with the number of different devices, the number of different channels, this idea that you know exactly where your customer is going to start, you know what your first interaction is going to look like, and you know exactly how it's going to progress and what that final result will look like, is simply not the case. Now, we still have some of the basics on here. We can start with awareness and move into a preference, some research engagement, ultimately making some kind of a transaction purchase or conversion, and then you've got some customer loyalty side of that. But as far as the actual journey itself, the customers are really in control. They go to the channel that they want to go to. They interact in the way that they want to with the brand. And so we need to take this into account when we're planning. We can't simply act like it doesn't exist, but there are ways where we can take advantage of this.
Yes, Corey, being linear certainly creates a challenge here, and if it wasn't challenging, everybody would be getting this right already. But in addition to not being linear, the fact that people are using multiple devices creates an even bigger challenge. And layer on top of multiple devices, sometimes using multiple devices simultaneously. As you can imagine, many people are often using their television as well as a device simultaneously. And then people also start an activity on one screen and finish it on another, as our lives appear to be busier and busier every day, and we never have time to finish the activity that we've actually started without being interrupted and have to finish it later. And the number of us who are using multiple screens every day is just growing and growing. So the ability to figure out and solve this problem, not just the nonlinear aspect, but also the multiple device aspect, is just another part of the issue that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and then there's the technology side of this. It's certainly complex, and the organizational realities often mirror those complexities. So it's important to note that while the tech side of it is really necessary, and we need to think that through, it's not just about the technology. It's really about making sure that you also have an organization that is aligned and has the capabilities required to deliver this omnichannel experience. And so we see that organizations often use technology as a crutch or in some cases an excuse to why they're not delivering the right customer experience. But I think what we want to talk through here is making sure that in addition to the technology, you start putting some thought into making sure that your organization is able to operationalize this so that when the technology is in place, you also have capabilities to take advantage of that and ways in which your marketing operation acts and executes to deliver that experience. Okay, so a few things on here on how to begin. We've got some kind of key pillars that are here. First one, we're going to map this customer journey, really think about this from the customer's perspective. Then we need to design the right data architecture, understand what you've got in place, what those gaps might be, and then really think about how to operationalize this omnichannel experience. We're going to take that action through the activation piece of it and the analytics to make sure that we're measuring and optimizing. Now, these steps shouldn't necessarily be considered sequential. There are really 4 components that can lead these organizations closer. As I mentioned, you might start thinking about the operational piece first if that's something you can attack right now. It doesn't necessarily have to be a 1, 2, 3, 4 approach. But we also want to think about the fact that this is not a one-time exercise. How you're going to engage with your customers, it's going to continue to evolve, and your approaches will adapt alongside that. So it said in that Starbucks example, this iterative approach is really the way to go. let's tackle that first one here, how we're going to map the customer journey. Now we think about a few best practices here. Think about customer journey mapping. It's really this process of tracking and describing all of the different experiences that customers have as they engage with your brand. Now it's going to take into account not only what happens to them, but their responses to those experiences as well. So one of the things we want to think about here, really highlighting customer paths that may not necessarily be known, kind of make sure that we're looking for any gaps in the data. And the big key here is to provide this path that's going to allow us to prioritize what we're going to do. So a few things when we want to consider this. We want to think it's not necessarily about the channel. In fact, we want to very specifically not think about an individual channel or a touch point. We're thinking about the actual customer interaction with your brand, regardless of the touch point. So again, going back to some of the kind of classic journey stages, awareness, engagement, conversion, retention, advocacy. Those kind of high-level concepts are important really to keep in mind when we're framing this path. The customer journey map is often going to be much more cyclical in nature, so folks don't just enter one place and exit the other, or often have folks that are moving in and out of those stages at different points. So a few things to remember as you start thinking about this customer journey. First is to focus on the customer. This is absolutely about them and their goals and their needs and their desires, not about your marketing goals. Keep it simple, so this should be something that's quite visual and snapshot. Try not to overcomplicate this. Don't think of every single possible permutation, but keep to those high-level pieces. And also utilize internal knowledge. You know, we see folks really jumping to a lot of expensive research and things when there are first steps you can take based on what you've already got. Definitely come up with hypothesis. It's fantastic to come up with what you think the scenarios might be and what your hypothesis might be, but make sure that you're actually testing and verifying those hypotheses and not just making those assumptions. And then again, keep it fresh. You got to plan for regular updates. This will change and evolve, and expect that to happen and plan for it. So we recommend approaching this customer journey with a focus on audiences and then how you're going to activate against those audiences. So there's really kind of 6 relatively straightforward steps here. Now, from an audience point of view, it starts with defining those key audiences. So this initial list will be very familiar to everyone in the organization. Maybe it's recent purchasers or high lifetime value folks or online purchasers versus offline. Think of things that everybody in your organization is going to quickly understand what you mean by these key audiences, probably ones that you've already got defined even within your organization. You've probably already done some level of segmentation, so start with those audiences. Now for each of these audiences, you want to identify what are the attributes that define that audience. In other words, what data do we need to be able to identify who is in that audience? This could be their lifetime value, share of wallet, or channel usage, or however you're going to define that audience. And you want to identify specific business goals. Maybe it's you want to increase repeat purchases or increase referral rates. And you also want to think about any known challenges, maybe technology limitations or gaps in the data that might need to be kept in mind. And then finally, and most importantly, identify your customer needs and desires. Again, always thinking about it from their perspective. And then on the activation side of things, for each of those goals that you defined in that earlier step, think about those key scenarios that your audience is going to be going through. So for example, you're in a hotel and your business goal is to increase vacation stays for your loyalty program folks. Now the customer desires to find a new sun destination where they can utilize their points. So again, don't confuse those two. Now with that in mind, there's a couple activation scenarios that could be created across those various touch points. So you could think about featuring specific destinations with promotional emails, or within the mobile app, or crossing over to the web experience. You could have promotions that test special incentives that are going to be around their points or double points or something that's going to specifically look at folks using those points. Access to unique experiences at the destination. There's lots of ways where we could think about how to enhance that experience. It's really critical to prioritize this based on the potential value of those scenarios. That way you're getting the most bang for your buck, and then test and validate that throughout the process.
So let's talk a bit about getting started with this, because with everything that we're talking about and doing, if you don't just get down to it and get started, we don't actually get anywhere. And it can be very challenging, which can seem overwhelming. So we need to focus in on getting started. And so it doesn't have to, you don't have to be bogged down in terms of how should I create a customer journey? Do I need special software? Do I need special tools, etc. It can be as simple as sticky notes on a whiteboard. Whatever format's going to help you and your team get up and moving on this, that's the one that you should start with. One of the next keys to sort of boil this down and get moving is to prioritize the key experiences. You don't have to, out of the gate, try and map every journey. Pick a small set and get started. Leverage existing data and platforms every chance you get. The more that you can bring into this, the better. As Corey said before, you don't have to start by going and exercising expensive third-party tools or data sets. Use what you've got. And don't try and do it all at once. You may have lots of platforms that you can leverage, but keep it simple to start with. Build small and iterate from there. It's crucial that you try and codify this effort, document it, and share it with others so that it will become part of the DNA of the organization as a whole.
Okay, second pillar, design the right data architecture. Now, certainly, we said the organizational piece is important, but of course, so is the technology side of it. And every architecture is really going to begin with the strategy, and that's something to keep first and foremost. You can think about this as organized into three main areas: collect, connect, and manage. So the first piece here, at a high level, we're going to provide a comprehensive view of the available data, and we're going to define a process for how data should be collected across your first, second, and third-party sources. So more on that in just a second. We're also going to think about this data acquisition opportunities and how we're going to use it to enhance our customer profiles. And always thinking about things from a customer-centric perspective. Now there's a bit of a tendency here where you may want to try and collect everything, and you may get focused on how to collect more and more, and that can, where folks can get a little bit get stuck in that mode. Resist the urge to try to collect every single point. Again, come back to that strategy. What are you trying to accomplish, and what data do you need to do so? The next piece here is arguably the most important, is the idea of how you're going to approach identity resolution. How are you going to take all these different data points you're collecting and start to pull them together to understand not just who is this channel in this session, but who is this customer, and what are the different touch points and channels that they are using? What are the attributes that make up this customer, and how do we start to put that identity resolution together? And the last piece here is the managed side. So how do we determine the overall data governance, our ongoing data operations? It's going to inform all these architecture decisions based on that strategy. It also is where we start to think about our privacy and regulatory environments, different areas that we operate in, the different rules that go through there. This is a pretty critical piece, especially from an enterprise point of view. Now, another thing is all of these pieces are ongoing. Again, we're going to have to evolve and update all of these on the future pretty much on an ongoing basis. Okay, now one of the things we want to do is we want to think about how we're going to do this from an audience and from a channel point of view. Now, even though we're omni-channel, everything is really kind of governed by the realities of data that's available to define our audiences, and then how each of these channels is managed. Now, audience is determined by the amount of data that you've got in your customer profiles. So we need to know, number one, can we uniquely identify the customer? Can we connect that first, second, and third-party data? And then how do we best deal with the anonymous visitors that are coming through? What can we do to take advantage of those and connect those points? Now, from a channel perspective, we also need to think about, if we're going to activate this audience across all the channels, are there specific constraints where we are going to restrict audience types in particular channels? Some channels are simply more able to activate than others. And then how can we ensure that audiences are consistent across those channels, what they're seeing and how we're interacting with them in a consistent way? Now, the reality is you just can't get all of the same info from every channel. We're going to accept that, and we're going to build that in as part of our plan. We can really break this down into 4 key steps. So first, collect the data. First-party data, remember that's data that's owned by your organization. This is your CRM data, your point-of-sale data, your loyalty, your customer service, things where people are interacting directly with you, they've identified themselves to you. You've also got first-party data that's on your website, so people who are coming in on e-commerce actions, mobile apps, so there are digital channels that are coming through. There's second-party data that's working with a trusted partner, and they've shared each other's first-party data, so someone else's first-party data is your second-party data. And then there's third-party data, and most marketers are familiar with this: demographics, interests, affinity markets, things that are going to be usually anonymous data but coming in an aggregate form that's going to give you and enhance your understanding of your customers and just give you a little bit more information about them, such as a demographic info. So the second step here, once we've kind of collected all this data, is how we're going to unify it all and accurately assign these into an individual profile that's around a person. So various methods to do this, and that approach is really going to come down to your organization, your tech stack, what you've got available, and what you're trying to accomplish. The third piece here is to actually create these audiences, and we're going to do that from that identity management piece. We're going to start to group these similar profiles into these audience segments. We're not necessarily trying to jump right into one-to-one marketing here. We can start to say these different identity folks fall into these different groups that are based on my particular business segments. And it helps us really understand how we're going to start to market to them and how we're going to put that content together and deliver that right experience based on those audiences. And the last piece is that activation side. We're going to activate across channels. It's our most important step where we can really take those audiences and where we're going to make that content available across our channels so they get that consistent omni-channel experience that we're all going for. Now we come to the actual architecture itself. This is one example of a data architecture. Yours may look a bit different, but every organization is going to have some version of this schematic. When we think about this, beginning up here with our first-party data sources up on the top left, this is going to encompass all of those different touch points we talked about, the CRM, the point of sale, the loyalty. And this is going to be in conjunction with the available second or third-party data. So that data is collected into this staging area or this landing zone, sometimes known as. Now from this landing zone, we've got the heavy lifting of that data integration. So how we're going to transform all the data sources into that consolidated view. It often ends up in a data warehouse of some sort. And the identity resolution here is called out. This is a critical step. In order to support omnichannel, profiles must be available for activation across this entire marketing stack and often in real time. Now lastly, we're going to have a view of the granular data that's going to be available for measurement so we can optimize against it. So one of the first things you can do here is analyze your current state. And so before we kind of jump into what content you're going to deliver where and need states, one of the first things we need to really think about is just simply what do you have available and what is possible given where your current data infrastructure can be. And so we want to identify these key audiences. So example here on the left, we have all the way from registered down to anonymous. So basically the various states of how well someone has essentially identified themselves to us. If you're registered, I've got your name, I've got your email, I've got everything about you, all the way down to anonymous where maybe you just stumbled across the website and I really don't know much about you at all. Those are going to dictate and determine the extent to which I'm able to deliver things for you. And so here in the green is the data is available to that channel, all the way to the yellow, sometimes available, not available, or simply not applicable at all. And so going through here, an example of this might be email. And so for a registered user, it's green. I can absolutely send you an email because I've got your email address. I know about you. I've got a customer profile. I know what you've purchased. I know things about you. I can segment that list and send you that email. Same thing if you've converted. In my particular process, in order to convert, you have to give me your email. So I've got that down there. Now on the known side, maybe I do or maybe I don't have your email there. So it depends on the situation. And then of course for an anonymous visitor, it's not applicable because I wouldn't have your email address at all. And so for each of these channels, start to think about what's possible and what can we do for each of these different key audiences for us to understand what our current gaps are and what our current capabilities are. Okay, now lastly is this operational piece of this. And there's no getting around the fact that omnichannel operationalization is difficult. So this is one thing we want to think about, and it's a key kind of differentiator. We talked about the moving from a multi-channel to an omni-channel. It's often about moving from a coordinated campaign to a truly coordinated marketing effort that is always on. And so when you move from a campaign perspective to an always-on marketing perspective, you really have to be purposeful about that and think about what that entails. First thing here is identifying the organizational changes that you need to go through. So not just thinking about marketing, but sales, service, maybe engineering. If you want to be everywhere that a customer interacts with you, you've got to think about all those different touch points. And so shifting away from that campaign mindset is really going to think about a briefing process. So it could involve your agencies, your partners, your platforms that need to support this always-on mode so that whenever a customer reaches out in whatever channel or interaction method they choose to, they are going to get that same consistent experience. We also really need to think about content and how that's going to be available to each of these touch points. Again, going back to that, the next step of that previous slide is to start to think about which content are we going to place into each of those channels. And then think about the governance structure to ensure that these processes are put in place and managed well. This may mean some dedicated program or project managers to make sure this is all stitched together properly, content managers to come up with editorial calendars and make sure that you're not just barraging folks, but there is an actual curated way and that you're interacting with your clients. Really no one-size-fits-all here. This is going to have to be something that really is where the art of marketing meets the science of the technology.
So what are some of the best practices? We see that many brands are currently set up from a channel-centric point of view instead of a customer-centric standpoint. In order to truly capitalize on omnichannel, leading brands are moving towards organizing themselves based on customer audience segments. Likewise, given the complexity of the platforms and the true scarcity of technical expertise and talent available in the marketplace, many organizations are deploying a center of excellence model that is shared across the business. This can be a channel-specific center of excellence, such as email, or even a cross-channel function, such as analytics and data science. Defining the right governance process and ensuring that you have the right marketing ops model will really bring this to life.
So if we look at what's required to really support this transition to omnichannel, it becomes clear that the overall organizational structure is going to need to evolve. And this is like I said, can be one of the most challenging pieces, even more so than the tech. There are several key roles, though, that are going to need to be in place to really enable this segment-based and even the center of excellence approach. So it becomes first with establishing this key audience owners. So someone who really owns this audience and making sure that the campaign planning process shifts over to support this new structure, particularly in the always-on case. Now, most of the companies who are utilizing this center of excellence model, they're going to take the channel experts and make them available across the entire organization. They are a resource to the audience owners who are going to plan their customer engagement strategy with those different channel experts. So in order to be able to support this coordination between the audience owners and the channel teams, this is where the program management approach is often one that folks rely on. It really provides that orchestration across the channels, not only in the upfront briefing process, but through that workflow, through the operationalized process. Now, since we're trying to enable this always-on capability, you want to make sure that you can do that from a scale that you now require. Again, so thinking about how to prioritize that. The first place that organizations will be impacted with this is the need to provide content across each and every one of these channels. So organizations have introduced dedicated content resources that are managed by, you might think of it even as like an editor-in-chief. He's going to oversee the overall content calendar and make sure that these required assets are across all the channels. Now, there's a similar approach that Forrester took here. You can see this is actually a Forrester graphic when they were looking at these roles that are required to just create this new style of marketing. So while each of your respective organizations are going to need to create specific operational model to fit your requirements, it's definitely going to be clear you're going to probably shift from where you are today to get to this always-on engagement capability, and that's particularly true if you are in a channel-centric or even a campaign-centric mode currently.
So getting started often starts itself with clarifying who's going to do what. And one of the important things for who's doing what is you're setting out your swim lanes, and if things go wrong, you also know throat to choke. So as a starting point, you may want to review your current organization, how you're set up to support working across audiences and channels. We find that a great tool to do this is something called a RACI framework, where we're looking for someone who's responsible, the R, someone who's accountable, the A, consulted, the C, and informed, the I. If you haven't worked through a RACI framework before, you might be surprised to find out how much overlap actually exists and potential to have multiple stakeholders across different responsibilities for a single audience or even a single channel combination. Or more likely, you'll find out that you don't even have one person responsible for this, and stuff is just falling through the cracks. As a part of the process, it's very important to include internal stakeholders as well as your external agencies. You want to make sure that these groups are talking together and in sync and involved in the same RACI framework. So now let's talk about taking analytics and activating it. This little graphic here is something that is probably too common right now. You'll have your analyst who's throwing out these different metrics that they're able to report on, be it bounce rate or unique visitors or conversion rate, and different analysts will be using different ones. And as the business manager, you sit there scratching your head going, how does this information affect revenue, profits, customers, customer experience, reduce cost? What's in this? You're making me think here. Don't make me think. So we have in place, hopefully, data architectures that will provide a foundation to enable analytics and activation layers. And measurement begins with your understanding of your key performance indicators. These KPIs must be consistent across channels. It's perfectly fine to have additional channels with specific metrics, but the core set needs to be consistent across all channels. Initially, the core set doesn't need to be very large. It's better to have a solid foundation and build from there. And really at the start, think about it as the critical few.
So one of the things that we want to think about here is making sure that our KPIs are going to align and they're going to remain the same across our different audiences. And we definitely want to make sure this is relevant for the customer-specific lifecycle stage. A perfect example of this is thinking about engagement within some of our social channels. If a customer's just discovered your brand, it really doesn't make sense for them to focus in on whether or not they're tweeting about your brand, right? So this is one where we think about the individual KPI of that. In this case, where we can look at each of these intersections. So I've got the customer lifecycle across the top. And again, awareness, consideration, purchase, loyalty, advocate, these are going to be kind of some of the more common ones, but you want to make sure that yours is in there. And then the different audiences. So in this case, buyers, browsers, customers, and influencers are the audiences that have been defined by this organization. And when they're looking at the intersection of these two, is going to really kind of define the KPIs and goals for each one of those. And so each one of these stages is going to have a different way that you're going to measure success that rolls up to your overall business. So we talked about that first case, awareness, and for each of these ones. So I wouldn't necessarily expect someone to be out tweeting about my brand 5 minutes after that they just became aware that my brand even exists. It's not a reasonable expectation. However, after you've made a purchase and become familiar with my products and are now one of my customers, in the loyalty and the advocacy, particularly side, I would expect that to be a KPI. Are people out there tweeting and becoming brand ambassadors to further amplify your message? So that's going to be a specific KPI that would make sense across the advocacy stage, but not necessarily in the awareness. Now, on the awareness side, it might be whether or not folks saw a tweet that someone else was tweeting about your brand. That could be an awareness KPI that would make sense around a tweet. So what you want to do is think about what are the KPIs that make sense for each one of these stages and each one of these audiences, and then this gives you the ability to understand and measure your success at each one of these stages. Once you understand how you're doing for each one of these audiences across each one of these stages, you can optimize. I know that I'm doing really well in terms of awareness for influencers, but not so well on the purchase side of things. And maybe you're doing fantastic for customers to the purchase, but they're not advocating on your behalf. And so this is where we can really start to optimize once we've identified these individual KPIs and then the overall business goals that they roll up to.
Let's take a look at a case study here. And in this example, we're going to look at one of the world's largest automotive aftermarket brands that has a very large retail footprint. They sell a number of products and services that would span tires, oil changes, brakes, etc. They have a very well-established online presence with typical features on the site that you'd expect to find, like a store locator, the ability to generate a quote, schedule an appointment, sign up and download coupons, click to call, try to get financing for more expensive products via their private label credit card, and all those great things. And even with a significant spend on paid digital, their approach was fairly basic. And we see this a lot. Generally, they used to say that if an action happened on their website and it showed that a customer was interested in their services or product, regardless of what the action was, it was worth something. And so they'd tell their agencies and share with multiple agencies that they were working with that here is the blended rate or target CPA for these actions. So go and get me traffic and don't spend more than this based on the success metrics of things like store locator and click to call, etc. So what did we find? Looking at the combination of online and offline data, we found some very interesting results that included specific actions were more predictive of future purchases by categories than others. The purchase intent model that we built identified some consistent behaviors within their customer base. For instance, if they had an urgent need, they were broken down on the side of the road, their battery was dead, or a flat tire, then the click-to-call and store locator were most predictive of an in-store purchase. We knew they had an urgent need, and because of this, they were looking for things like emergency tire repair or specifically a battery replacement. We built some purchase intent models with all of these signals for the different segments of users and found some really interesting things. For customers who had time on their hand, unlike those broken down on the side of the road, perhaps it was a squeaky brake, or they were wondering if their snow tires were going to make it through the next year, maybe they were hoping, they weren't sure. We'd see things like an email newsletter sign-up being most predictive. This makes sense when you think about it. People are looking for a coupon when they sign up for something, and they've got a little bit of time on their side, so let's sign up for this email, download a coupon, and we'll see if I really need it. If they're looking at high-cost products, such as an air conditioner or a whole new set of tires, maybe 2 sets of tires, then financing was a much bigger predictor. They'd sign up for the branded credit card, and you could be pretty sure they'd be coming into the store to make a big ticket purchase. It's not likely you're going to go through the whole process of filling out forms to sign up for financing with a credit card and then not go in and actually purchase something of significant value. So what do we do with this? Previously, as I mentioned, they had a single CPA goal for all their campaigns across all their products. The purchase intent model that we've just discussed allowed us to get more clarity on how they should approach campaigns based on the desired goal. While the data shown is not the actual data from the results, if you look at the table and assume that product 2 is tire repair, then we know that click to call is the most predictive action that we should optimize for. If our analysis shows that the predicted value of this action is $5.60, then we need to ensure that our media plans take that into account. Of course, the analytics are only part of the equation. It's critical to ensure that your media team take the information and make changes in the appropriate way so that they can optimize the campaigns. In this particular case, it allowed for the client to move away from relative optimization, or the blended or aggregated CPA, which resulted in a CPA decrease of 5%. In concrete terms, this optimization has been tied to specific actions that have been taken, driving real results.
Okay, so in summary here, I think we have some kind of top takeaways. The 4 main pillars, we said we want to map that customer journey. Remember, thinking about this from your customer's point of view. What are they trying to accomplish? What are their needs? And is your content delivering on that need at every one of those steps? We want to think about how to organize this by audience and by channel. We want to make sure that the data is going to enable the activation side of that and the analytics so that we can optimize that. And think about this from a process point of view. Process really sets that strategy free, but make sure that when we think about data architecture, we're coming back to what is that strategy and that everything is being guided by that strategy. Otherwise, it's really easy to go down the rabbit hole of technology on that side. And then lastly, making sure that you have the right team to deliver. So whether that's in-house, whether that's agency help, making sure that you've got the right folks organizationally set up in the right way, whether it's that editor-in-chief, whether you've got those program managers, and really thinking about whether you are structurally set up from an organizational point of view and whether you have the right folks available to live in this new omni-channel world.
Great. Thank you, gentlemen, for that great presentation. I really appreciate it. Some really good step-by-step tips there, and really appreciate that. So we've got a few minutes for some questions here, and a few have come in. Thanks, everyone, for submitting those questions. You can continue to do so in the questions panel of your screen there. And the first question for the folks at Cardinal Path: how do you go? I know you talked a lot about segmenting audiences in reaching out to different audiences. How do you go about defining audiences and segments?
Yeah, so once you've got all the different channels and all the kind of stock there, then you have to fill out that left side of the matrix, which are what are going to be your different key audiences there. And I usually suggest that folks start with your business segments, the pieces that everyone in your organization is going to understand. So I was thinking about the easy one to understand is airline frequent flyer programs. You've got your different segmentations there into your silver, your gold, your platinum users. Someone who's never traveled on your airline before may have much more need to have help navigating through the website and maybe more price conscious as someone who is already in your platinum status, less so. Their needs are different. They're very used to your site. Things like efficiency and the perks that they get, and highlighting those are going to be more important. So thinking about already the segments you have in your business. Once you kind of move beyond those obvious ones, some folks start to look at what we call data-driven segmentation. So using clustering technology to look at the data and look for highlights and clusters that exist that you may not have been aware of. You may not realize that there are entire audiences or folks that have certain motivations that you hadn't thought of if you've been kind of operating in the same way. We see a lot of brick and mortar folks who, as they make the shift online, they don't necessarily realize that there can be entirely new paradigms from an audience or segmentation point of view. So some of that data-driven clustering analysis can really help you find some of those those needle and haystacks you didn't realize were there.
Great. Thank you. The next question we have for you that came in, how should we pick which channels to concentrate on first?
Well, I think there's a few different ways that folks go about this. I mean, first, one way you can think about it is where you have the most spend. If you're going to make changes and you want, especially if you want to have some initial quick wins or be able to demonstrate the value of this, by looking where you have the most spend is where you're going to have the most budget impact and be able to generate the most excitement if you are able to move the needle. The other way you can look at this is where you have the most data available. Certain of these channels are going to be much more easy to maneuver, the ability to have registered users and the ability to, for example, a lot of folks will do remarketing. Remarketing across display is something that's very well understood. It's relatively easy to activate, and so a display might be a channel for that remarketing to folks who have essentially have an interest in some of your products or have done things that indicate to you that they would be right for remarketing. So pick those targets to where you're going to have the most initial success on that. Even you look at email. So if people who have a heavy CRM, to be able to go in and do that analysis in your CRM, figure out what the past behavior has been, what's going to be predictive, and then create specialized emails that you send out is something that folks are already doing from a very common point of view, and making sure that that strategy is consistent across your overall marketing campaign for that omnichannel effect is an easy place to start.
Great. Another question that's come in. What is the key identifier used when a customer purchases something in a store versus when they purchase something online? Are you talking about a credit card number here, or do you ask for an email address when they check out in a store?
Yeah, so this is a couple things in this. This is part of where that taking stock part goes, is what data points do you currently have and what gaps do you have? And then the creative part of the marketing side becomes, how do I fill in those gaps? Is it by technology or is it by operational? And so you mentioned credit card numbers. For those who've ever used the Square checkout at an airport or somewhere else, it's really clever. Once they figure out the first time that they get your email and they can link to your credit card, every time you use that credit card, no matter a store you've never been before, you walk up, swipe your credit card, they will email you the receipt. And often you hear people say, well, how did you get my email? I didn't give you my email. Well, they've got your credit card, and if they have ever received your email and are able to link those, then on the back end, they know this is you using your credit card, and they already know your email. Regardless of which merchant actually passed it through their system, they, as the credit card processor, already know your email and can send it through. And so they're able to take advantage of that, in a fairly clever way. But certainly this is the original use for loyalty programs, and why you're seeing more and more of these loyalty programs come through is people identify themselves and then they want to get the points. So they make sure that every single purchase they do, even if they have a receipt and they have to go in and enter it in, after the fact to make sure they get their points, they are making sure that the customer says, hey, I want you to know about every purchase that I've made across the way and what my preferences are from that. So linking the loyalty programs is an easy way to do it. And we often see folks concentrate on things that don't change. So certain, even credit card numbers can change, but folks rarely change their email addresses. They sometimes do, but rarely. Same with phone numbers. Phone numbers tend to never change. Postal addresses very rarely change. So we see focusing on the things that are less likely to change over time, even as as other things might be more ephemeral, cookies and things that get deleted and cleared. And the key here, I think, on the creative side is to really think about how a brand is going to provide a good value exchange to do that match. You can require it, but you'll find much more luck providing something that's going to give some value. So you see a lot of folks at the cash register offering to email your receipt so that if you ever want to bring the item back, you've got it in your email. Well, yeah, sure, but in order to do that, you're going to have to give them your email. And now they know how to link you in that CRM, and they've got that piece that's important to them by giving you something that's of value to you. And then there's also the third-party data providers that can help you match those purchases to brick and mortars. There's folks out there who maintain massive match lists of online cookies, email addresses, postal addresses, all those who can help make those matches for you. It's an entire industry dedicated to that. John, feel free to anything else.
No, I think you really nailed that one.
Great. Just one other. This is just a clarification question. Someone's asking what on slide 20. There was a question about what DPM means. Can you explain that to us by chance?
Yeah, so I think that was probably the plumbing slide on there. Maybe that's type. I think that would be the DMP, the data management platform. And so this is a piece that's really pretty central to a lot of folks in their strategy from Omnichannel, and the role of data management platform often is to first of all connect that first and third party data, so it's largely the role of that, and really to try to understand all these different points that are coming in, how do you tie them together to understand how to coordinate those efforts. And so DMP is pretty central to a lot of the plans on here. If folks are going about Omnichannel, I really think it's worth learning about that from the side of things. We won't have time here to go in depth and detail, but if there's anyone on the call who wants to learn more about DMPs or get some more information, feel free to reach out. Happy to send some more information there, but it's definitely a pretty core component of being able to do that identity resolution piece.
Great. Another question's come in about Starbucks. In the Starbucks example you mentioned, you have a consistent owner of the brand in all channels. This is obviously ideal, but the attendee is asking, but how do you implement an omni-channel approach when you're distributing through retailers that are interested in promoting their own brand experience and create your own omni-channel experience? This is most challenging.
Yeah, this is particularly challenging. It is nice to be in a position where you are sort of in control of everything from end to end. And in general, if you think about people who have a tough time with this, the CPG or consumer packaged goods, that they have a tough time with it as well. And while they don't have the large set of first-party data that they can leverage other things such as social channels and paid media, and they'll often be working with partners at the other end to help fill in the gaps, and this is the idea of the second-party data, the end retailer to help them fill things in, particularly the large ones who have large data sets that will fill in big holes all at once. But the same principles apply: consistent messaging and offers across every channel, even if you can't control for the retail channel or where you're going to want to start. But you are going to want to try and see what you can do, and as mentioned before, loyalty programs, you'll see a lot of CPGs using loyalty programs to try and find a way to connect you with the product. But it is more challenging, and it can get to a point where it's more probabilistic than deterministic, but there's still a lot of things that you can do to create a more consistent and appropriate communication with your customers.
Great. Another question we've got here, what role does testing play in all of this?
So this is near and dear to my heart. I think that one of the best, kind of byproducts of really understanding these touch points, and think about that matrix grid that had the audiences on the left and the journey on the right, is once you start to identify what the KPIs are for each one of those, that's when you can start to deliver the right content that makes sense there. And we find is a huge shift when you start testing overall. You think back to that the example I had about the shoes. Yes, you may find that the women's shoes on your entire universe of audience, maybe they convert the best. But when you can start to break it down by audience and by journey, and then you can start to customize content for that, you'll get a much better response. Similarly for testing, if I'm trying to find one piece of content that works the best across my entire audience in every scenario for every single person, sure, I'm going to be able to find that kind of local maximum. But it's going to be much better if I can start to test which content works for which audiences in which stage of the journey, and then I can deliver that particular content to that individual from that personalization point of view. And so as we start to try to figure out which content works the best for which audience and which stage of the journey, testing is the way that we do that. And you'll find that if I can test per audience and I can start to test per segment and per stage of the journey, you will optimize at a much higher rate and find those, those individual maximums that are going to overall be much better than trying to find a one-size-fits-all for everybody in every scenario.
Great. All right, well, we're near the top of the hour here. I think we're going to go ahead and leave it at that. Many thanks to John and Corey at Cardinal Path and to everyone for attending the webinar today. As I mentioned, you will receive an email over the next couple days with a replay of today's webinar and instructions for downloading today's slides. Thanks again for attending the webinar today. We hope you enjoyed the presentation and wish you all the best. Take care.